Operator syndrome number 40, I think. Um, Welcome back, everyone. We're coming back to my timeline. Disclaimer up front, the next two episodes, Steve and I have actually recorded already, and through a comedy of errors, we're having to re-record. So if you hear us referencing the last time we talked about this, we're talking about something you wouldn't have seen yet. So, um, it's amateur hour here. We're trying to figure it out. We appreciate your patience. Today, we're going to get into, a topic that a lot of people are interested to hear about. It can be a tough thing to talk about, and that's combat and that's death in combat. Um, I figured I'd start off, in my timeline, we're still talking about that same fall winter 2007 deployment I had to Afghanistan, and um, you know, I think the thing to bring up at the top is for the time I was serving and the missions we were doing, which were capture kill raids. That's all I did in the time that I had served. Most of the time the point was not to get into a firefight, right? The point was to to capture first, right? Capture kill. You say capture first is to is to capture the person you were going after, so that way you could leverage what they knew and
Right,
the stuff they had on them to um, uh, to use to find more targets. Bigger fish, right?
right,
So yeah, that's the key thing to know is that we preferred not to have to kill anyone. We really did. Like we wanted to grab people, we wanted better intelligence, and we wanted to move on to the next person. So I would say, and we talked about this when we recorded before. This deployment was the most kinetic, is what a lot of people say, and what they're really saying is like you got the most gun. That was this deployment for me. Um, and even then, 99% of the time, no shots fired. Right? We came in, we caught them off guard, we grabbed who we needed to grab, or we didn't find them. That happened a lot too. And then we
right.
moved on. We moved on with our lives. They were detained. They whatever happened to them, and then we went on to the next night. Um, but there were a few moments during that deployment that stand out to me where I was confronted with combat and death. In a previous episode, I talked about one especially hairy mission where we were shot at, pinned down, all that good stuff. So there's that. But you know, other than one person, other than the ground force commander getting hit in the leg, we were all physically unscathed. Maybe emotionally and mentally, we were maybe we carry that, but physically we were okay. We had survived that. In terms of one thing that I'm blessed and cursed with at the same time is that I never had to see any of our own guys killed, and that's the blessing, right? um, the entire time, five rotations between Afghanistan and Iraq, to include this one, which was pretty wild. I'd see guys shot, seen guys maimed, severely injured, but never dead, and I do consider that a blessing. The flip side, and we'll talk more about that whenever we get to like the transition part for me personally out of the military, was the difficulty around when guys would die. I wouldn't be there. It was always when I wasn't there that guys died and disappeared, right? And sort of started to build like a complex from that. Um, but going back to combat and what I did see, I did see plenty of EKIA. For those who don't know, that's enemy killed in action. So one of the first times that I saw an EKIA, it was earlier on in deployment. We had gotten off a bird for that mission. I was going to be helping out a gun team at a BP, a blocking position. Um, we came off the bird. We set up real quickly, and I was fortunate that my BP was like right off of the LZ, so that's always nice. Not a lot of walking.
Right on the X.
Yeah, yeah. So we set up. I take a knee, and then I'm chilling, and then I hear like a bunch of commotion, and I hear a burst of machine gun fire, and we're like, oh, okay, we're getting into it tonight. So now you're more alert. You're kind of looking around. The assault squads go and do their thing. I guess I don't remember us clearing anything, but it's been so long now, and I was on the outside. But you know, towards the end of that night, we break down. We break down and we get in a security position around the objective and pull in security with the rest of my squad. When my squad leader hits me up on the radio, he says, "Hey, come over here, come check this out." So he pulls me from our security position. I walk over. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get some kind of tasking, right? He's gonna say, okay, we need to move out to this other place, get ready to move, or he's gonna have me do something with my team. But I go over there and everyone's just kind of, you know, there are a bunch of us pulling security, doing the right thing. And then you kind of have the antenna form, which is what we call the
Yeah.
sort of the command group. So you got the RTO and the FO and the ground force commander. They got antennas sticking up from all their gear. So we call it the antenna form. But I walk over, there's some folks milling around. Walk over my squad leader and sitting at our feet, some dead guy. Um, I've been on a couple rotations, but I hadn't seen a dead guy yet, a dead enemy. And I look down, and this guy's definitely dead. Um, he's laying on the ground. He got stitched up by some machine gun fire, and he is, we'll say, grossly disfigured. His head is grossly disfigured from catching a few machine gun rounds.
Mhm.
Um, and it's pretty gnarly looking. But to me, it was also, and I think it says something about special effects today. Like it was like a movie when they show stuff like that. It really was. Like I was like, oh wow, I'm seeing parts of the body you don't normally see unless you're watching like a horror film.
Right.
And I was just like, I was pretty stunned. Um, and the squad leader brought me over just to show me this dead guy. Steve, when we were talking about it last time, we'd kind of gotten into the motivation behind that.
Yeah. Right.
Like what would compel a
Right.
squad leader to just bring a guy over to show him a dead body.
Right.
Um, I was actually surprised by I wasn't surprised, but your reaction to that story,
Hmm.
surprise, I'd say a little bit of disgust,
Hmm.
even maybe.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Just curiosity at the reasons, like what is the underlying motive? Like why?
mhm. And that your reaction to me telling that story was a reinforcement of what my gut told me,
Yeah.
which was this isn't quite right, something about this is a little off. And
Yeah.
so in that way it's sort of comforting to talk about it, to say, hey,
Yeah.
this is what happened. um, and when we talked about why someone would do something like that.
Hmm.
um, what's I think it's the movie Stand By Me. That's
Yeah.
it? Where you got the boys and they're like, "Hey, you want to go see a dead body?"
That's
You
right.
know. So I think what we had discussed is it's a little bit of a maturity thing,
Hmm.
because you got to remember, especially for Rangers, um, we're all upper, 18, 19, 20, 21. If you're 21, you're like an old guy. You're
Right.
like, you're like an old guy in a platoon when you're 21.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a maturity thing, but I think most of it was like hey, here's a dead body, come check
Right.
this out, right?
Right.
Like, so on some level, it's a maturity thing,
Uh-huh.
but it's also part to play in that. And this is me guessing motivation afterwards, because by the way, when I was a senior team leader, I spent a very short time as a squad leader, but I never brought folks over to look at dead bodies. It's just not something that sort of crossed my mind. But another part of it is, especially for us joining, a big reason someone joins the infantry specifically, or special operations in general, is you want to know what it's like when you get in combat, and a part of you
Yeah.
wants to know what it's like for the guy who loses,
Right.
when you have contact. So I think that part of played a part in it too.
Yeah, the maturity and this general fascination, just the human fascination with death. I mean, it's a heavy, heavy thing. When I was in high school, I had a buddy who his father owned a bunch of funeral homes. Um, and he took me one night. We were just palling around. We couldn't drive yet, so we were dependent on his parents. His dad had to stop at this funeral home to get some papers or whatever, work related. And so my friend took me through. He played a little prank on me and took me into this the autopsy room. I mean, where they did, I
Okay.
guess, not really autopsies, but they did the
Like the prep.
preparations for the
Yeah, like
body.
the prep. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a guy. I guess I don't know what the situation was, but his whole head was cut open. I don't know if they were having to reconstruct something, but it was just his whole head was cut open. But it was pitch dark. He led me. He knew where this guy was laying on this gurney, and but it was dark. So he went across the room and goes, "Hey, wait right here," and then he flips the lights on. I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
whoa." That's not cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, he got a big yuck out of it, and later we moved on. But it was just that whole thing of the heaviness of a human being who's deceased. It's kind of like a mixture of taboo versus a sacredness. I mean, this is a human being who
Mm-hmm.
has lived and breathed just like all of us. So yeah, it's just a weird thing, and it's definitely maturity. In our case, that was big time lacking. But yeah, just that whole the uncanny, the macabre, the sense of
Mm-hmm.
this is weird. Just fascination, not necessarily in a bad way, just human curiosity, I think.
Yeah. It's funny you bring that up because I had seen, I'd seen a dead person before. I'd been to a funeral for my grandmother and
Sure.
grandfather's, I guess. So I'd seen open caskets,
Right.
you know. So I'd looked upon a body where I was like, yeah, this is different. This is not the same. What
Right.
I'm looking at here is not the same thing that you know they used to take care of me and hug me
Right.
and love me. I'm looking at like a vessel here. There's something missing.
Right.
So but in this other context, obviously at a funeral they've got him cleaned up, looking good in
Yeah.
his in a suit, in a dress, right? So something more palatable. But
Yeah.
here I was, it's some guy sitting laying in the dirt with his head open, um, with a bunch of dudes crowded around him, you know, and and it's not even like so the squally and I are looking at this guy because he brought me to look at this guy, but the rest of the people sort of milling around, they're focused on the operation, right? So it's not even, it was odd in the sense that it wasn't like a reverent moment because you got a bunch of people on radios talking to
Right.
aircraft and coordinating the next move and this and that, and
Right.
there's this guy here just sort of sitting in the dirt, with his head split open.
Yeah.
It was pretty wild. For additional context, I told this the last time I recorded. I didn't tell it this time. So what had gone on is, this guy had squirted from the target building. They sent the dog after him, and then a squad was obviously trying to keep up with the dog to chase this guy. This guy had pulled out a pistol, looking to engage that team that was running him down, and then they returned fire. Um, so I wasn't feeling bad for that guy
Yeah. Yeah.
necessarily, but also I was just struck by, here's a guy who's running around a second ago and now he's just sitting there while we're getting ready to move on.
Yeah.
So pretty gnarly. And then so I'm standing there, I'm looking at this guy, I'm like, son, I'm like, okay. And then the squad leader was like, all right, you can go ahead and head back. Hey, send over XYZ, send over an X.
Yeah. That's
Right? He's like, hey, let's get everyone rotated through here, take a look at this. And I talked about this before. My platoon, and it happens, it up to this point, it had been rare for them to get into any sort of contact. Um,
yeah.
you One way to look at it, like I said before, is they were doing a good job. So
Yeah.
maybe they had 2, 3 rotations where they just kept a clean record and it didn't have to come down to that. But it just hadn't. So it had been a while since, confronting, this life or death thing had come up. And so, in that moment, that's how he chose to present these type of situations to us. Um, so that's the first time I'd seen an EKIA. One story from that same deployment that popped up that's memorable to me was I probably in the middle of the deployment. We were going after some guy again, like always. Um, Again, my squad was, and we rotate. For those who don't know or haven't caught up before, oftentimes the line squads or the assault squads will rotate. So they'll rotate between being first assault, second assault, and then the inner cordon or the security. Just because everybody likes going into the target. Everyone likes being the person that finds the guy you're looking for. Um, it's not always as fun being out on security, except when they squirt from the target, and then you got to chase them down. But on this particular mission, um, I don't remember the specifics, but the guy had someone had squirted from the target building as they were setting up on it, and so my team had to find this guy. He had squirted uphill. The target compound was kind of in like this bowl valley. It was surrounded by a gradually rising high ground around it. It was very pretty. If it weren't for the situation we were in, it would have been like I could see how someone would want to live there. But this guy, he squirts and he goes uphill. And the thing about the terrain was it was basically like gravel hills, except it had these huge um, stone like school bus size like stones. What do you call
Mm-hmm.
them?
Boulders.
Boulders, yeah, boulders. And so this guy had ran uphill and he had hid in these boulders. And he was going higher, higher. He's trying to crest it and go down the other side. So the AC 130s that were supporting that mission that night, um, they were doing they were putting on fires to um, to contain this person from getting too far away from us. Um, there was a lot of stress around wanting to make sure that we weren't engaged since my team was the one closest to this guy going to run after him. So, I just remember, one of the things I remember about that mission is just being in awe of the capabilities that the United States has.
Yeah.
I'm thinking there's this, there's a C-130 in the sky that
Yeah.
has like a chain gun, like
Two chain guns.
two, yeah,
Two chain guns, 20 millimeters, two 40 millimeter Bofors cannon, and a 105 mounted sideways.
and I'm just sort of in awe because by the way, I had just been a suburban teenager, not a couple of years before playing Call of Duty,
Right.
that had this stuff,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
here I am, and I'm just sort of my mind's blown because there's this AC one. My team is the one it's supporting. You got this whole aircraft, all these guns on it that's working together with us to keep this guy from running too far. You know, they're firing their cannons, and I'm seeing like the sparks and the detonation of it at the top of this hill. And, I'm aware that there's shrapnel that goes along with that. So we're taking cover. I'm telling all my guys to throw their strobes on because I'm probably I'm probably more worried about it than I should be, but I really don't want to get shot by a 40
Oh,
millimeter round.
let me just say, insert something here about particularly in particular AC 130s. They're so I'll kind of back up a little bit. It's a C-130, which is a cargo plane that's been adapted with all kinds of really high tech electronics. They're called Spectre gunships, is their name, and they have on one side of the plane on the fuselage. That's where all of the guns stick out on just on the one side of the plane, and the plane circles with those guns kind of aiming down, and then it's a crew of quite a few Air Force people.
Yeah.
Some guys are just looking at the optics. Some guys are on the guns. You got your pilots flying it. It's a real operation, and they are scary. And one of the scary. The first time I ever called for fire from one of those things, and I don't know if Patrick, kind of depends on the angle you're at, but one of the eeriest things is when those chain guns fire, because I mean it just like an eruption of just death. I mean, and the eeriest thing is the sound, because you I wasn't ready for it the first time, and then I kind of got used to it. You hear the first thing you hear is a supersonic crack of all these bullets. Sounds like firecrackers going off, like a pack of firecrackers, and that's all the supersonic cracks of the bullets going over your head. And then you hear the impact on the ground. So you hear this kind of crack, 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 thump, 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 and then you hear the guns from up at the plane, the muzzle, and it goes, and it's like in that order, crack, 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 thump, 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 and it's just as weird. It's just eerie. It's deathly eerie.
It's intense.
And the other thing too is I think the most one of the most dangerous things that we ever faced when I was in my short stint in combat was I was more worried about us getting shot by our own people, because we are accurate and we have good weaponry.
Yeah.
And the scariest thing I ever experienced in the Gulf War, just real quick, and I'll get back to Patrick's story. That was we were flying in it was a MH-53 Pavlo special ops bird helicopter. We were flying over a warship, a U.S. naval warship, and we got locked on.
No kidding.
I could hear the pilot and the junior pilot because I was on ICS. That's the communication system, because I was putting guys out. We were jumping out with a boat. So I was the air guy. So I had to be in communication with the crew. And everybody else was just sitting around with the dip in, just chilling. They don't know what's going on. And I'm like, my eyes are like this big, because I hear the pilot and the junior pilot. He goes, oh my God, they've got radar lock on us. And he goes, I know, I'm bursting my IFF, which is identify friend or foe. He said, they ought to know it's us. They ought to know it's us. The guy's like, damn. He goes, oh, are we gonna be all right? And he's like, I hope so. I hope they get our IFF signal.
Whoa.
And I'm just thinking, this could be one big ball of fire in like 1 nanosecond if they
Yeah.
decided to shoot surface to air. Um, Finally, we communicated and they found out, hey, this is us. But that was the scariest dang thing in the entire the entire Gulf War.
Think,
Um,
think
yeah.
about how many gray hairs that gave you. And that's
Oh,
what and that's and it's and something like that, people don't get it, right? They only people who don't know,
yeah.
and it's not their fault that they don't know.
Right. Right.
But people don't know that when you're serving in that capacity, you are constantly confronted with these situations where you could die. And
Yeah.
it's not even and an enemy shooting at you is the simplest version of that, right?
Right.
It's the one we train for. It's the one we're used to.
Yeah.
Like the emotion, the emotional and mental toll it has to take to sit there on internal comms listening to the pilots freak out about getting shot out of the sky. That's intense.
Yeah.
That's rough,
Yeah. Not pleasant.
and that was just another day for
Yeah.
you. It's
Just
just another day, and then that could have happened two more times. But yeah, so I and don't even get me started about what I was thinking about. That was like the automation, because they
mhm.
got like the CRAM, and I don't know if they had that back then, but like the automated fire control stuff. Like
Right.
then it's even more scary, because it's one thing for some 20-year-old Bubba, I don't know, fire controlman who pushes a button, but that's a person who makes a call versus you know a computer that's like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know what this is, let's just go ahead and light this thing up. That
Right.
freaked me out. But so yeah, so we're sitting there around these boulders. We got a million IR strobes going. I'm being extremely cautious, picking around these boulders, looking for this guy, and this guy has to be scared out of his mind. Anyways, we're working slow and methodically around, just because I don't want to get popped coming around a corner. So um, it's day starts to come. We always raid at night, right? So the sun is starting to come up, and we're getting closer and closer, and we have a sniper team that's doing Overwatch. Overwatch of the target, whatever went down to the target, and I actually think they did have to take care of a guy there on the target as well. So everybody's ramped up. The sniper Overwatch team transitioned to supporting my team, as we were looking for this guy, the squad that's looking for this guy, picking around these boulders, and and we're coming around one boulder, and then actually we're about to step around a boulder as we're coming around, and all this time the sniper team has gotten eyes on this guy that we're looking for. They see him and they observe a threat. And so we're about to come around this corner to look at this guy, and we hear incoming rounds, and in the moment you don't know, or I don't know, is this guy shooting at me? I don't know what's going on, you know. I'm in sensory overload here. We got containment fires going. We're trying not to get jumped, and then I hear this fire. It's close by, and then I hear like a thud, and just like a sack of potatoes, this human being drops. And remember, I said the ground is like gravel, and then this dead body just goes sliding past us, down this hill. And it was the sniper team who had engaged this guy. So we were close enough. They observed a threat, and they took this guy out. Very close to us, extremely
Yeah.
close to us. We didn't see the guy, but I guess this guy, there's another scary thing. This guy did have, that's what we were worried about, and this guy did have the jump on us. But we had, our sniper team watching out for us and took care of this guy.
That's how it's supposed to work.
It's how it's supposed to work, but it's intense.
Yeah, yeah.
So I spent that whole mission being down on the receiving end of American fires. Thankfully, it worked out the way it's supposed to, right?
Right.
Containment, you got the sniper team looking out for you. And I didn't talk about this the last time we had spoke about this scenario, but this sniper team got so many kills that deployment. I think we talked a little bit about how just the way that we raid, the way that we conduct it. Snipers are just often in a good spot to see threats ahead of the assault force, and to be able to mitigate it with accurate fires, right? Like that's the way you want to do it. But this team, they were the nicest guys, So they, Steve,
That's always the way it is.
Steve, they were the nicest, happiest guys. They walked around with huge smiles on their face. Steve, they held the Bible study for the
Ah,
platoon.
nice. Yeah, I like it.
They were the lay leaders, dude.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and it freaked, and my best friend Jose, it always freaked him out, because he was like, it really bothers me how godly they are and how
Yeah.
friendly and always smiling, and then they
Getting
go out
blasted in the face.
every night and just are just like killing so many guys.
I know. It reminds me of like in Save It Private Ryan, there was a sniper in a tower.
Yeah,
He was like
yeah.
a creature. He was like, Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He's just chambering rounds, like peeling off these psalms and stuff. Yeah.
So so that was an interesting, almost combo. There's nothing funny about it, but it was just very
No, no.
interesting, right? Like just
Yeah, it
sort
is.
of the duality, just like wow. And they were great guys.
Yeah.
Um, and they also loved coffee. And I actually drink coffee now because of that deployment, and they they opened my eyes to flavored coffee. But anywho, so uh, so dead guy comes rolling around. Again, I'm a young guy. I'm confronted with the idea that, if they were fixated on the target for some reason, which they could have, if they weren't looking out, first off, so thankful to them for doing their jobs and being really good at their jobs, because the shot they took was, you know, it was a
Yeah.
decent shot. It was a decent shot that they took. But they're always looking out for us, and you felt comfortable. But here's a human being. 1 second he thinks he's got the jump on us, and then the next second he's a sack of potatoes sliding down the mountain, right? And so, um, yeah, again, another scenario where I'm confronted with this idea. Um, the last story that we told last time was, a situation where I had to discharge my firearm at a person. Um, you know, Most of the time, especially in Afghanistan, because there's just so much distance, right? You got into some real like infantry type, like
Yeah.
standard practices. Um, like I said, 99% of the time, we didn't have to shoot any. Like we got the jump on them. We got them when they were sleeping or hanging out at home. You know, no disrespect. Someone says you're a bad guy, we got to take you. But in the times you did have to shoot, even then it broke down further into different situations. A common way that in the infantry you learn about where and when to shoot is known, likely, and suspected, right? So if you're
Right.
taking fire, you need to fire, the first thing you're going to look for, okay, I see a person, I know they're shooting at me, I'm going to shoot back. But there are a lot of situations where you don't know where it's coming from. So
Yeah.
that's when you get into suspected and likely. So suspected is like, okay, looking at the terrain and what's in front of me, if I were, if I, uh, here's like an open area. It's unlikely that someone's sitting out in the open firing at me. Here's some buildings. That's probably where they're shooting at me from, right? I get a good sense of that's where it is, or someone's called up that, hey, you should look at that middle building. And then likely it just goes back into the more like, I'm just generally aware that this is the likely place. And so, in Afghanistan, anyone who was in Afghanistan and took fire, most of the time it was the likely and suspected that you were shooting back at. Um, the mano y mano, like I see you, you see me, and now we're shooting at each other, that was rarer.
Right.
So, there've been plenty of times where someone's shooting at me over from the right. Oh, screw you, fire back, fire back over there. And then you close with and you find them or you blow it up, using air support.
Sure.
But, there's one mission where we had gone into the middle of this village. It was a village out in the middle of nowhere. And um, the way we set up on this target compound, it was like a crowded space. I think we might have been second assault on this one, but the main assault squad was set up to breach this gate, and there was like a main common area for the village. This target compound was just off of this common area, and there was like a well. There was a well in the middle of this thing. So we had set up at this well because it gave us good cover. But we were looking like more or less right at this door. And then the assault squad was in our field of vision coming from the left. We set up like we always do. Snipers went up. Everyone's got, black site security. We're all set up. Everything's good. A perfect setup for us, textbook. And we're set up there. The assault squad is creeping up to the door to this gate, this big gate, to assess it. Um, and I'm staring at this, doing what my job is. I'm staring at this gate, and I see and hear the gate open. So just you can see one side kind of like that, and this guy steps out, and it was like it was slow for me. It was slow motion. I see
Hmm.
this guy step out, and He's looking right at the squad that's going to do the breach, and almost like a police you watch like police training videos where someone like kind of comically like slowly brings up a weapon right
Right.
to get like that's what it was like for me. I see this guy he has an AK slung by his side, and he's bringing this thing up, and it's like slow motion. I see him bringing up the AK. I'm like, whoa. Like in my mind I'm like, holy shit, like
Yeah.
it's happened, this is it, it's happening. And I'm seeing him bringing it up, and like we've got lasers, so we're at night, we're under nods. And so when you're under nods you have a laser, and who knows what they use now, they probably got holograms and shit. So you know this was 15 plus years ago. So we got lasers, so you got to throw on your laser, and then that's how you fire. So laser on this guy, and by the laser on, and then I pull the trigger on this guy. Well, so did everybody else. So did everybody else set up on this target. Like I said, it was crowded. We had a lot of people focused on this breach point, and
Mhm.
uh, laser on, I fire, and this guy disappears into a brown cloud of dust. Like
Yeah.
everyone and their mother saw this dude laser on and lit this guy up. The medic
It's,
afterwards said there were too many
yeah.
entrance and exit wounds to count. He's like, this guy
Swiss
just,
cheese.
yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Um, and and So it's like he disappears in this cloud of dust. I see, I see that assault squad who's breaching. They're like grabbing the first guy by his plate carrier and like pulling him away. I'm like, oh my god, that guy's shot. You know, pulling him away, and then there's like this sort of lull, and where all of us are like, well, can't believe this just happened. Um, uh, and then and then so that squad, the squad that's breaching, I believe, pulls back. We're second assault. We end up going in there. But what had happened? It's so confusing and it's so long ago. What had happened was that guy comes out of the gate. Everybody kills him, I guess. And then the snipers were dealing with two guys on the inside, and these were bad dudes. There's no question about it. They had the full get up, chest racks, grenades, all kinds of stuff. Like it's not uncommon for people to be armed in that
Yeah,
in that part of the world, but chest racks with grenades and stuff, that is not normal. So
they were
um
war fighters.
yeah, so they were bad dudes, and we had collected enough stuff on the target that we had to blow it in place. But you know, and that's another scenario where okay, that's it. Like that was my one time seeing a real bad guy and then having to make the call to shoot the guy. In some ways, I'm kind of absolved from my own concerns about did I do the right. I mean, I know it was a good shoot that you couldn't. There was no questioning it. He was about to shoot my friends,
Right.
and so I don't lose a lot of sleep over that. But at the same time, so did 20 other dudes,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So it's like it's not my burden alone to carry, so it's not something I
That's
worry about.
kind of good in some ways. Just you fight as a team, you train as a team, you take it all as a team, and that dilutes maybe the pressure in some ways because you're all in it together. And yeah.
And in a lot of ways that's the way it should be,
Hmm.
because especially with the way we were working and operating back then, it's like it's you're in a bad spot if you're a one on, that something is wrong if everyone's kind of like that one mission,
Yeah,
if everyone's covered down on different sectors and you got the hordes of
right.
people coming at you. But um
Definitely that guy's day was up. His number
that's
was up.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, well, that's the end of this episode. Appreciate you all listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.